Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, I don't even really know what to call today's technique. However, I'll just call it fun because it was so much fun. You'll see in this video it was very experimental for me, and it's sort of a learning curve as with anything you try and experiment with. But this gorgeous feather, which is just one of my favorite stamps right now, I love this. It's from the Visible Image pack. I think it's called Forever in My Heart, or Forever in Your Heart, or something along those lines, but I will always link everything down below in the description box in case you want to double check or check on a product or purchase it as well. Now, I am going to stamp this out twice using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Now, I'm just stamping it twice because that's what I had room for, and I thought that I might need to experiment with a couple of these. I'm doing a first layer here in some clear embossing powder. Now, basically, embossing powders are the name of the game today. Now, in hindsight, this feather was, I don't know whether it was the best choice for an image. I'm also going to show you it on some clear, just some plain die cuts, and I think that worked. I don't know better. I don't know. You can let me know in the comment section down below which one, but I had so much fun, so it doesn't really matter which one, but I'm just melting this very first layer. Now, I'm going to show you also a couple of different ways to do it because I always believe that no matter what the products are that you have in your craft space, there's always a different way or another way or a way that you can take whatever we're doing and do it some other way. So, I am going to start off by putting some color down onto the background of this feather, and this can be done using any mediums at all. I'm choosing to ink smush this because it's one of the quickest and laziest ways to color. It's sort of fast, it's just you dip and you go, you dip and you go. And so that just sort of takes the control out of my hands a little bit too, and I honestly quite like that. It's just sort of you get what you get and it takes the thinking out of it. So I am going to fussy cut the feather. Now, I have done this a few times for this image, and it really is, it sort of looks like it's got all those bits on the edges, but it's really simple because all you have to do is kind of two cuts that sort of go down into a triangle to get out those little feather pieces, and there's actually not that many of them. So it's not tricky fussy cutting, which is the key here. Now, I am going to use some VersaMark sticky embossing ink. Now, remember that the color there is not trapped at the moment. It is still water reactive, so I'm just using my finger to apply the VersaMark rather than dipping in the whole image. And if your VersaMark has enough juice in it, then it is going to sort of be just fine. You're going to get that sticky goodness everywhere. And all I'm doing is dipping it in some clear embossing powder. This is just the plain. I usually get these super fine embossing powders because that way I can do really detailed images, but I can also do solid images like this one. So all of my embossing powders in general are the super fine version if there's a different version. But anyway, all I'm going to do is keep going with how many layers I can possibly imagine. Now, I have obviously sped this process up because you get the gist of it. What we're doing is just adding something sticky and then adding the embossing powder. Now, if you are quick enough, you don't even have to add more VersaMark. You can just dip and go, dip and go. Now, you might not get smooth results with that, but you will get a lot of embossing powder on. If you have it, another way to do this would be to use the ultra thick embossing powder, which is just that really, really big jar, and I will cotton onto this soon, so don't worry. The idea here is that we just want a big, thick layer of clear. Then I'm going to take a little scoop and just drop some little piles, I guess, of white embossing powder. Then this tool, I love this tool, it's from Kaisercraft, and it has a little scoop at one end and sort of a pick at the other. I'm heating from underneath because remember these are little piles of embossing powder. When you melt this, it melts into the clear down below, and then before it dries, I'm quickly going to swirl this around with my pick end. So we're creating this sort of gorgeous swirled little embossing situation. I just do a little bit of the feather at a time because it does set and cool pretty fast. You've only got about I don't know, 10 to 12 seconds to really maneuver it around, because it's like a little hot pool of molten plastic, I guess, and then it starts to set. So it really is a trial and error thing. The top ones there I think look really good. This one I'm not sure whether I kind of swirled it a little too much, and maybe my piles were a little too big. It started to get a bit of a hot mess down here, that's for sure. Now, did these feathers evolve along the way? Yes, because I actually am not going to be finished. Once I think I'm finished with this feather, I'm going to come back with it once I think of some more ideas. So this is kind of the basic version where I just put the little piles of white and then I melt it from underneath, and then we're going to swirl it. So this looks beautiful. The blues underneath. It might be a little bit confusing with the black lines of the image, but I still think this looks really nice. That doesn't bother me too much, but that's what made me decide to do the just plain die cut shapes. So there, so you can do a little bit of the twirling with the pick, and then any embossing powder that dries onto the end of your pick, it just comes right off in a little ball. You can actually see some little balls in the bottom right of the screen there, and that is from, they just fall off the end of the pick. Now, here are some hearts. I cut this out from the Honeybee Stacking Hearts dies. I just cut out a few because I wasn't sure. Then I thought I would add some colour behind them, some abandoned coral, some spiced marmalade, and some mustard seed, which is really just a sort of orangey red to orange to yellow, just because I thought I wanted some colour behind them. But actually I'm going to do some that are just plain white as well, and I love those. I'm going to make some finished cards for you today as well. I know my videos are ending up a little bit longer these days, and it's just because I try and pack so many cards or so many techniques into one video. So I know that I try and aim for around the 10-ish minute mark, and they're all sort of going over at the moment. So I know that most of you don't mind that, and I appreciate that. And I am aware of it. It's just that I get really excited and my brain sort of trails off into these different directions, and then I think, but what if I did this? But what if I did this? So thank you so much for sticking with me throughout these videos. I truly do appreciate it. This is where I clicked onto the ultra thick embossing powder, which is just, same thing, clear embossing powder, but bigger chunks, and obviously it's just going to melt exactly the same. But the brilliant thing with these little hearts is that I'm able to dip them straight in the jar. When I'm using ultra thick embossing powder, I do like to do one layer of clear embossing powder, just the normal superfine one, first, and then I feel like the ultra thick sort of melts into it better. Now, it doesn't matter that I'm not covering the entire heart when I dip it in, because it's sort of, when it turns into a liquid, it's sort of self-leveling. It sort of levels throughout the entire heart. So don't worry that the top edges there aren't getting so much. And I'm always heating from the bottom, because ultra thick is very easy to blow away unless you have really, really good sticky ink. So I'm going to do the little heart this time. So these basically end up with like a good dome of clear, what looks like sort of a glass dome above the shape. Then this is where I bring in the white powder. I'm going to heat it from underneath, hold it with my tweezers, give it a little swirl, and this is just really fun. Of course, you could do this with anything, and this is sort of all the different colors that you could mold together, and fun. Lots of fun. As I said, my brain was just itching to go in a whole lot of different directions, and I got to go on a couple for this video, but I need to sort of rein it back in. So I think the sort of smaller spots, the better, smaller and more, rather than sort of big puddles of the white. And also remember that when they melt into the clear, so to speak, in the background, they are going to move. There's going to be movement because it turns into sort of a liquid that can move. So you can actually tilt them back and forward and get more of like it reminds me of pouring, acrylic pouring. That's what it reminds me of when you move, like if you pour it over a canvas and then you move it, tilt it to kind of cover all of the surface. That's what this reminds me of if you didn't do the swirling. But of course it does sort of set quite quickly, but you can kind of keep the heat underneath it when you're doing it. I was going to show that whole process, but it goes a little bit differently to this one, so I tried to keep on track. Now at this point I took the plain hearts. I've already added the big gorgeous dome of clear on there. It's nice and thick, and then I'm going to add some coloured embossing powder to this. So I started off, this is quite a big heart, so I'm just going to start off with 3 piles there, and at this point, don't ask me why, but I was quite zoomed in, and so I really am not doing a good job of keeping it in the space that it needed to be. So I apologize, it's not under the camera. I keep coming out of it, and I think I was just so happy and so enjoying myself that I really wasn't focusing on where the camera was focusing, which is a great thing for me, but not so great for me when I'm trying to edit it and explain what I'm doing. But the gorgeous wispy sort of look that you get with like more moving it around and tilting it here is absolutely stunning. Then I couldn't help myself. As I said, I was on a roll. What about if I added some yellow? Now, until very recently, I truly did not have any more colors of embossing powder other than gold and silver and some white and clear. That was all I needed. I did go ahead and purchase a couple of colors because it was fun to challenge myself. It was fun to use the colors. Usually if I needed colored embossing, what I would do is I would stamp the image in some VersaFine clear ink of the color that I want, and then I just emboss it in clear embossing powder, and that gives you that colored embossing look. But obviously with something like this, you can't exactly just drop in the ink colors, or maybe you can. Imagine if you did a nice big gorgeous dome of clear embossing powder and then you dropped in some re-inker. Oh, what would happen then? Okay, but as you can see, I am adding in some of the yellow. I'm sort of sprinkling a little bit with my fingers, and it ends up that sort of gorgeous dotty texture. This reminds me in acrylic pouring of the spots. I can't remember what they're called. That's what it reminds me of when I'm doing this, but not the same process at all, but I'm just saying that's what it reminds me of. So yeah, this was such a fun process, and I definitely was just happy as going along and adding lots of different pieces. Now at this point I have this one here, and the gold flecks in this are strong in this embossing powder, in this particular one. And so it's really hard to catch on camera though, because when I tilt it in the light, you just catch the reflection of the general sheen of the embossing powder full stop, rather than the gold sparkle that comes through. So it's really hard to show you, but it's absolutely stunning, the gold through this. It's so hard to capture, and it's sort of something you can really only see in real life, but I promise you it is absolutely stunning. It looks like a little bit of a hot mess, and I might have taken it a little bit too far, but I had heaps of fun, and that's the main thing. And we're still going to use it on a card, and I still think it looks gorgeous. Now here is card number 1. I have a piece of nautical blue cardstock, which is just a deep dark navy cardstock from Hero Arts. I have the Ulta New burlap texture die. Now this one is fun for just putting behind things. I have some matte medium. This is what is in my glue bottles. I just take it from these bigger bottles and transfer it into the glue bottle with a syringe. And then you have to make sure that you squeeze out the air before you squirt the syringe into the little bottle. Sounds confusing, but there's a video on my channel called How to Fill a Glue Bottle. If you just search YouTube for it in general, you will absolutely find it and make it a really simple process. But for this, I'm just using a makeup sponge to pop some glue on the back, and then I'm popping these down side by side just for some great texture in the background. You could absolutely just use some texture paste and a stencil and sort of do something in the same direction. That would look beautiful. I'm adding some foam tape to the back of all 3 of these gorgeous hearts. And in fact, I'm going to leave this one without a sentiment because I think it looks stunning just as is. And I really like the ability to just pick up a card and not have a sentiment. You can really fill the inside in your message that you're going to write personally to somebody. And I also find that these are really popular with people as well when they come to raid my little card stash and pick them for themselves. They often, the ones with no sentiments, tend to go first. So I figured that that's what others would like too. Now you can see that I am mixing up both of these hearts here, the ones that I did colour the background with ink and the ones that I didn't colour the background with ink as well. I'm just going to layer them up, and this is just going to be gorgeous little floating hearts on the front. I am going to, the panel that I put it down was cut down to be 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So by the time I put it on my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, all of those little extra bits that are coming off from the texture die are pretty much going to be within the card space, but just so I can fit it in an envelope nice and easy, I am going to trim off any little extras that just poke out a tiny little bit. But how stunning is that? And I can't even tell you in real life what these look like. It's really hard to show you. Now, this is just going to be a quick base. I have some cracked pistachio and some tumbled glass distress oxide inks. I had this strip of paper sitting there beside me, and I was like, this is perfect to highlight my feather. So I'm just doing some really light ink blending, and then I'm going to take the brushed hex stencil from Tim Holtz, and then I'm going to just pop this over top and do a heavier layer of the same color on top. So where I did tumble glass, I'm just going to do tumble glass again, but a little bit more ink than last time, and that's going to create just a little bit of interest in the background, but not enough to take away from our very bold but gorgeous feather. This is one of my favorite uses for stencils, is to create some background noise. It doesn't matter whether necessarily the pattern, but some of these universal patterns that aren't too specific are great stencils to have on hand. Now, when I was thinking about what else to go in the background, I wanted to add some burlap twine. This actually came from burlap ribbon. You know how I take it apart because I don't have the burlap twine by itself. That's why it's all in little pieces, and I can wrap it around just a couple of times each piece. But if you have some normal, you can just keep going around and around and around. And this, again, is just a little bit of background noise because our feather is very bold and bright in comparison to all of the colors that we're using here for this little showcase piece. So I'm not worried about it getting taken over at all, and it's going to be on a really plain background. This is just going to help it stand out and help draw your eye to that gorgeous feather that we created. Now I'm going to just use double-sided tape because this card is already going to have enough bulk with the feather. Pop this down sort of centered to the right a little bit, and then chop off the excess that is going to come down the bottom. This one I am going to put a sentiment on. You guys know that I love the Paper Rose All Occasion Sentiment Set, and for this one I have one called Wishing You a Fabulous Day. I just like this sentiment because it's really robust. It could be for a birthday, but it could also be for another celebration. It could be for any age as well, which I absolutely love. So I love that it's versatile. Now, I put the feather down flat with some double-sided tape, but because of the gorgeous dome from the feather, I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of the sentiment, but I'm going to miss that word fabulous because that's where it's going to cross over on the feather, just so that everything sort of sits nice and even and equal along the top there. It is such a shame with these cards that you can't see the gorgeous big dome of glass and color that is on top of these. You'll just have to trust me that in real life it looks stunning. It's very hard to convey on camera. It's very hard to capture the gold flecks in this one, which is such a shame, but these are absolutely stunning in real life. And if you need to look at any of the supplies, I will have them listed down below. I will also have a link to the Buy Me a Coffee website in case you would like to support my YouTube channel. But other than that, let me know which one is your favourite, and if you've done this technique down below in the comment section. And other than that, I will see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!